what can he tell me that I need to know? I have a pretty good position. I have pretty good power. I'm a leader of 100 men. I'm doing okay. Even the Jews respected this man. His reputation, even among the Jews, I mean, he had a great reputation even among the Jews. This Gentile. And so he's open-minded. And then let me suggest that Cornelius was a man not only concerned about spiritual things, not only being open-minded, but he was a respectful man. Because the Bible says that he feared God. He had respect for God. He had reverence for God. But I want you to notice the next phrase where it says, in reference to he feared God, and it says, with all his house. Talking about his household. Talking about those who made up his house. Not just his personal family, but others that were a part of his house. Now, what were they doing? Well, they were having respect for God as well. Notice, with all his house. How did that come about? Well, when you read that, it is suggesting to us that came about because Cornelius reminded his household about how God was to be respected. He himself respected God, but he also reminded those who were within his house to respect God as well. And then he says that he gave much alms to the people. And that simply means that he remembers those who are in need. The idea of alms here is the idea of generosity, act of kindness, benevolent act. And so here's a man who's remembering others who are in need. That's great. And he reached up to God in prayer. Now remember, Cornelius is not under the old law. But that's his wife's name. Cornelius and Cornelia. But Cornelius, don't you go out here saying, well, I've always said it to people who are watching anyway, so no. But Cornelius was not living according to the law. He wasn't under the law. But he was still living under that law that had already been set aside as well. But he was doing the best he could with what he thought was the right thing for him to do. Now look at verse 22. In verse 22, now, we're down the road a little bit. I remember Cornelius going to send for Peter. He sends a couple from his household and also a soldier, a devout soldier, to go get Peter and to bring him back. Okay? And Peter's asking these men, why have you come here? Asking for him. Why should I go with you? Now, he's already been told by the Spirit of God, I want you to go with these men. Now, Peter is asking these men, why should I go with you? And so here's their response in verse 22. Cornelius, the centurion, notice, a just man, and one that feared God, and of good report among all the nation of the Jews. He was warned from God by a holy angel to send for thee into his house and to hear words of thee. So when you look at all these phrases being used, these words being used to describe this man, a pretty good description. We could say he was a good moral man, okay? Based on what the Scripture says. And so Cornelius, a man that was concerned by spiritual things, he was open-minded, he respected God, and he was respected by others. But he was not a Jew. Not a Jew. The Jews considered the Gentiles as being unclean. And that's why they didn't want to have anything basically to do with them, no fellowship with them, because of that. But Cornelius, as you continue to read and study about him, he's a man that was earnest in the sense that he was very sincere in what he is doing. And we're especially to see that later on. And he's a man who loved God and he loved others. He didn't just say that, but he demonstrated that. And he was a man that was influencing others for good. And he was a man that when Peter did, when the angel appeared to him, and we'll see this here in chapter 10, he and told Cornelius what he was to do. Cornelius understood what the instructions were. And Cornelius did not argue with the instructions. Now we read the Bible of some occasions when people were instructed either by God or by an angel or by the Spirit to do certain things. And instead of just doing what was being told, they want to argue about it. You see, they want to argue about it. But that wasn't true of Cornelius. Now when you look at all those things I mentioned to you, I used his name, Cornelius, for those points. If Brett had been in class, Brett would have recognized that. He keeps track of that. And so we got down through the letter U in Cornelius' name. And what's the last letter in his name? I think it's an S, right? Cornelius. I think that's correct. So we got to come up with something that begins with the letter S. And here it is. Yes, he's a man that is concerned about his soul and others. He's a man who's open-minded. He's a man that respected God. Now, he was a man, not a Jew, but he was a man that was and is earnest and very sincere in what he's doing. He's a man that loved God and loved others. And you know, he was a man certainly interested in others. And he was a man certainly, ready to do whatever needs to be done. He was a man that understood the instructions that are being given to him. Now, the last letter, now notice, as you look at all those things, I mean, a religious man, a man who respected God, a man who remembered the poor. Yet, in spite of all those good things that can be said about this man, he was what? A sinner. He was saved not. Did he help the poor? Yes. Was he concerned about the souls of others? Yes. Was he influencing others for good? Certainly among his household? Yes. Oh, that's great. That's good. But you can list all those good things, attributes and so forth, characteristics. You can see how he was conducting himself. You can see his character, what he's really made of. And yet, he was a sinner. And needed, now notice, when you study this account, here's something that always needs to be on your mind. Here's a man who needed to hear the words of Peter. And he needed to hear the words of Peter, not just to be hearing something, but he needed to hear the words of Peter in order to be saved. Now, nowhere in this passage does it say that Cornelius was a sinner. The word is not used in Acts 10 or in Acts 11. So how do I know he was a sinner? Because he needed to hear words by which he could be saved. So that tells me he was not in a saved condition. So let's look further. You see the vision in verse 3 that Cornelius had. Here's the angel of God, and saying to him in verse 4, thy prayers, and notice the angel of God appearing to Cornelius was twofold. There was two reasons why he did it. One, to inform Cornelius, thy prayers and thine alms are come up for a memorial before God. God has regard for what you have done and are doing. Okay? That's to inform Cornelius. But number two, it was to instruct Cornelius to send for Peter. Now, verse 5. And now send men to Joppa. If you look on a map, here's Jerusalem. I'm looking at the map this way, you looking the opposite way. Here's Jerusalem, okay? Here's Joppa, and here's Caesarea. Caesarea and Joppa, they're about 30 miles apart. And so Cornelius is in Caesarea. And he's being told to send for this man Peter, who is in Joppa. He's about 30 miles away. It'll take a little while to get there, okay? But I want you to send for Peter. And when those men go, he says he's lodged with one Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the seaside. He shall tell thee what thou oughtest to do. Now, there's no confusion on Cornelius' part. Cornelius didn't say, okay, well, surely there's some other guys around here I'm sure he didn't say guys, but I'm sure there's some other people around here pretty close that probably could tell me what I need to be saved to instead of waiting for Peter to, I got to send men there and 30-mile journey and they got to come back and there's probably some other men around here pretty close. The angel said, you send for Peter. And it just wasn't any Simon, if you will, but it's the Peter that's lodging with Simon, who is a tanner, there in Joppa. Verse 7. And when the angel which spake unto Cornelius, notice Cornelius is now making arrangements to carry out that request. He called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier of them that waited on him continually. And so here are some men that he certainly would have great confidence in or trust in. He wouldn't just be sending anybody. And so sending these 3, and when he had declared all these things unto them, he sent them to Joppa. And so this first little section here is dealing with basically with Cornelius. Now Luke writes about Peter. And it says in verse 9, on the morrow, as they went on their journey, and drew nigh unto the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. He became very hungry and would have eaten. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance, and saw heaven opened. So what did he see? A certain vessel descending unto him, as had been a great sheet knit at the 4 corners and let down to the earth. And what did he see? All manners of animals and so forth. And some were common, some were unclean. Common and unclean. So what was said to Peter? He says, rise, kill and eat. So Peter he had this vision here, and there's a sheet, and there's all kinds of animals, even including some unclean animals. And Peter's being told, I want you to notice the response that Peter had. Contrast that with the response that Cornelius had. Cornelius, no argument, no questioning. And so when Peter was told, I want you to rise, kill, and eat, Peter basically says, that's not happening. I've never eaten anything common or unclean. That's not happening. You see, Peter's not remembering where this message was coming from. Well, we can read sometimes how Peter would respond to certain things happening, and sometimes he would speak without really thinking, evidently. And so Peter said, basically, this is not happening. I haven't eaten uncommon, I haven't even eaten that kind of animals, and I'm not going to. That's basically what he said. And so he saw this vision 3 times. 3 times he saw it. In verse 15, the voice spake unto him again the second time, what God had, and notice what was being said, what God had cleansed, that call not thou common. If God has cleansed it, it's no longer common. This was done thrice, and the vessel was received up again into heaven. Now, did Peter understand what was really happening here? Did Peter understand the message of that? No. Because notice what it says in verse 17. Now while Peter doubted in himself what this vision, which he had seen, should mean, he saw the vision 3 times. He remembered those words. But he didn't quite understand what all that meant. Then it was said, told, behold, the men which were sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate and called and asked whether Simon, which is surnamed Peter, was lodged there. And verse 19, while Peter thought on the vision, you see, he's still trying to wrap his brain around it. Well, what does that really mean? He's still not really understanding what that meant. But he's still thinking about it. And so the Spirit said unto him, behold, 3 men seek thee. Arise, therefore. Now we're going to see how he responds to these instructions. So he's being told here to arise, get thee down, and go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. And Peter went down to the men which were sent unto him from Cornelius, and said, behold, I am he whom ye seek. What is the cause whereof ye are come? And they said, as we read a while ago, verse 22. And that's what Peter did. He called them in and lodged them. Peter said, I want you to come on in. That was not done by the Jews during that period of time. A Jew is not going to invite some Gentile into their house. Unless they're thinking about doing some harm to them. Nobody's wanting to see it. But he's inviting them in to stay with him overnight. And on the morning and on the morrow, Peter went away with them, and certain brethren from Joppa accompanied him. We read later on, there are 6 Jewish brethren who went with him. So here is Cornelius, and we see what happened to him. We see Peter, we see what happened to him. And how Peter has been wrestling with this. I know what I'm being told to do, but I don't quite get this. I don't quite understand this. Then the next section, we won't have time to go through this, but the next section picks up with Cornelius again and how he's waiting for them to come back with Peter. And when you read this, you see that Cornelius is a man that's eager. There's this readiness of mind. He's ready for Peter to show up. He's ready for Peter to show up. We'll have to stop there. I just got started on this account, but we'll continue the next time I'm teaching here on Wednesday night. on this. So remember where we stopped, and we will pick up verse 24 of Acts 10. Brother Fred, will you lead us in prayer, please?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time together here in the middle of the week and go through this class and learn more about thee and thy word, how we can apply it to our lives so we can serve you better. Heavenly Father, help us to always put you first in our lives. You know, in the study of thy word, we will be